Sleep in heavenly peace. Sleep in heavenly peace. Obviously, I'm not the best singer ever. We're going to talk about a Christmas horror story. Well, I just got done, before this, I got done watching A Silent Night, A Deadly Night. And that had lower production value than this thing, right? So, this thing has high production value for one thing. One thing also, I didn't know this movie was released back in 2015. This seemed like a much older movie to me. Well, if you don't know, I've been doing a lot of traveling around the planets, so I haven't really had time to go to the movie theaters or see movie trailers. That's why I didn't know that this came out in 2015. So, yeah, so there's that. So this movie definitely delves into the lore of Krampus. This is, for the most part, an anthology film, where it tells different stories about an event that happens on Christmas. But, you know, the thing is, this movie would have been, like, really, really good if it wasn't for one cop-out at the end of the movie, but I'll get to that in a minute. So, basically, we're shown the character of Santa Claus, who is really bloodied up, and at first he seems like a kind of creepy dude, but he ends up being the so-called hero of the story. Well, at least that's what we're led to believe. And yeah, a problem I have with this movie in particular, is that this movie is slow as hell. This movie is really slow paced, and I was wishing throughout the first 30 minutes of the movie for them to just get to the point, as I kept shouting at the screen, get to the point, just get to the point. And this movie takes a while to get to the point. However, the other thing that bothered me, like I said, this is an anthology film. There's at least 3 different stories that happen in this film. And the most interesting to me was the entire Santa Claus segment of him being in the North Pole, dealing with evil elves that turn on him because of some sort of plague, and he ends up having to fight his whole shop of elves, right? That entire segment was interesting to me. Unfortunately, it was only in the movie for about 20 minutes. Everything else is about this family whose son disappeared in the woods and somehow gets possessed by Krampus. And another story involves a murder that happened in a house where these kids want to do a documentary for a school project. So they decide to go in the house where I guess Krampus also possessed that house. These 2 stories didn't really sell for me that for some reason. Like, I thought they were boring. And I think they should have focused on the one thing that made this movie, like, interesting. And that was Santa Claus fighting evil elves. And I just wish the entire movie was like that. So, because of that, this movie went way downhill for me. So if I were to watch this movie again, I would skip all the other scenes and just focus on the entire Santa Claus segment. And there's like this weird twist at the end that really bothered me at the end of the movie, that just made this movie almost unwatchable to me. Now, I'm all good for twist endings at the end of the movie. I'm all good for movies that have something to say when they show the big twist at the end of the movie. But this movie doesn't sell it that very well. And, you know, I've been watching a lot of horror-themed Christmas movies just for the holidays, because I want to watch some Christmas movies, and I decided to twist that a little bit and watch horror-themed Christmas movies. So, like I said, I watched Silent Night and Deadly Night, and that had lower production value than this movie. But I felt that movie was more interesting. So, at some point in the movie, as I'm going to explain the 3 different aspects. Actually, there's a 4th story within this movie, but it's not revealed till the end. The 4th story, I'll reveal that in a second without I don't want to spoil it just yet. Anyways, the family story, right? So, the dad is a cop and decides to break the law by going on someone's property and cutting down a tree, when he could have just, in my opinion, did that, like, somewhere a little bit further away, but decides to go in the woods and steal a tree. Anyways, something happens to his son where he disappears, and then he comes back, and this little boy is acting very strange after that. And I don't know, man. I want to explain this segment, but it's so boring to talk about. But I'm just gonna sum it up in a short phrase as I can possibly talk it about. So basically, the son gets possessed by Krampus. The parents don't know. The mom somehow finds out through an email from the owner of the land that this guy has been guarding these evil elves or Krampuses or whatever, as was explained, and so they have to bring the kid back. The kid ends up killing his dad, and the dad had an idea that there was something wrong with his son, but the mom didn't believe him, so the dad died. Eventually, she goes back and she gets her son back after killing the owner of the land or whatnot. Oh yeah, by the way, my reviews are basically spoilery. If you don't want this movie to be spoiled, don't watch this. If you don't care, then come here and have a discussion. However, I won't show movie clips at all of this movie because I feel if you want to watch this movie, instead of watching clips on the internet, you should just go watch the movie before we talk about it. Anyways, there is that segment, alright? The entire boring segment, and it was so fucking boring. Like, I struggled to get through that entire segment. And then there's another part where, like I said, the students want to go and investigate a house for a murder that happened some odd years ago. And it turns out that there was these nuns and Krampus again, and the girl somehow gets possessed by Krampus, ends up having sex with one of the guys that she's with, and she doesn't remember, and then she ends up killing one of the guys, and then ends up killing the guy she had sex with just to deliver a baby for Krampus. And then, for some reason, later in the movie, oh yeah, there's another segment of another family that gets lost in the woods, and this ties in with it, right? And there's this evil old woman, at least she comes off as evil, who's just a bitch for no apparent reason, and who's a bitch to the dad or whatever, to this third segment, this other family. And the best way I can describe it is basically the daughter, the dad, and the mom all have major flaws. And they don't admit it until towards the end, but by the time they admit it, the dad mentions that he's been into some fraud scandals. The daughter admits that she steals things, and I forgot what the mom said, but basically they all die as a result of their sins. But the possessed girl goes and finds that evil old lady that was being a bitch to dad earlier, and it turns out that Krampus was possessing her the entire time and kills the old lady. So there's that. I explained 3 different segments as fast as I could because I don't want to talk about it. I want to get to the meat and greet of what I want to really talk about this movie. So finally, I could talk about what I really want to talk about in this movie. So, William Shatner is in this movie. I was surprised. Like I said, I didn't know this movie existed until I started downloading. I started looking for some horror movies and whatever. And well, it's great to see William Shatner in this movie. It is so great. I was thrilled to see him. And as a fan of Star Trek, I don't really watch Star Trek that much anymore, but as a fan of William Shatner and his old Captain Kirk, yeah, it was great to see him in this type of movie. This movie got some nerd points up for me. And it turns out that he's a talk show host, and he's reporting that there's a series of murders happening throughout the city or throughout the planet. And he mentions that Christmas is supposed to be a time where we all get together and we all have, family values. But yet it always ends in bloody murder. And that is a good concept all on its own. I could completely dismiss the other 3 segments that I just talked about and just focus on this 4th segment. I wish the other stories that they were showing in this movie were shorter. Kind of like how VHS was. They should have been like just 10-minute stories, not 20-minute stories each. Because this movie is actually pretty freaking long. Oh my god, this movie's pretty freaking long. And so, yeah, there's that. And you just kind of feel for Shatner's character. Like, he wants the holidays to be about family and to be about, being happy. But it turns out that since he's a radio host, he's reporting on all these incidents that are happening within this movie. So that's one thing I thought that was cool. I just wish they focused on it a little more within this movie. Now, let's get to the final segment. The one I thought that was noteworthy of this movie. The one that still makes this movie watchable along with the William Shatner segment. And that was Santa Claus versus the Krampus versus the evil elves. Man, oh man. Like, despite everything else I don't like about this movie, that's one segment I wish they focus on more. I wish the entire movie was about that. But unfortunately, it was a cop-out. Just seeing these elves turn into these little evil shits. And like, and there's one part where they're at the North Pole in Santa Claus's shop, and Mrs. Saint Nick, I forgot her name, Mrs. Santa or whatever, brings the elves cookies, and they all start eating cookies. And one of the elves goes, "I don't want to eat your cookie." Man, I still laughed at this part. I laughed at this part so hard. And the elf refuses to eat the cookie. And Mrs. Santa's like, "Come on, you love my cookies." And then out of nowhere, he goes, "I don't want to fucking eat your cookies, bitch." And like, it's just so out of nowhere. And like, it made this movie for me. And I just wish there was more of that. And after that, the entire Santa Claus segment was just like that. Like, the elves were just over the top, evil, saying the most nasty things. Like, "I want to eat your brains out, Santa. I want to, The elves were so evil, and I liked it. I just wish there was more of it. I'm going to keep saying that throughout this whole review. I wish there was more of it. I do. And it just, it came off this creepy vibe. And Santa Claus mentions that elves can't die, and there must be some sort of evil force behind it. And a tragedy ends up later that Mrs. Saint Nick, or Mrs. Santa Claus, whatever you want to fucking call her, she ends up getting possessed by Krampus. And Santa Claus is obviously devastated. So he has to kill her. He ends up massacring his entire shop of elves just to get rid of this plague that he thinks Krampus is responsible for. Man, like, and that's all I want to talk about that part. That entire segment made the movie for me. I just don't know why they did not focus on that more. That's the movie I wanted to see. That's the movie I was hoping this movie would be, but unfortunately it was not that. The most of this movie is 1 hour and 20 minutes, I think, because this movie is pretty freaking long, of the other anthology stories that are not as interesting. And this one was interesting as hell. Well, unfortunately, that's where it stops there. Because after that, there is a plot twist that pissed me off so much that made this movie completely unwatchable. And that is where Santa Claus is fighting Krampus in the one-on-one match. The reason why I have a problem with this because this movie made Santa Claus be this like badass guy who fights off evil elves, who fights off evil and has a grudge against Krampus. And I wish it was like that. I think there is a movie. There has to be a movie out there, and I'm gonna find it. But if they don't have it, I want to see a movie of this Santa Claus. No joke, just this one. With no plot twist whatsoever. Because the plot twist I'm about to tell you pretty much like just destroy this whole movie. Okay, here he goes. Get to the point. So basically, it turns out that our hero Santa Claus was actually crazy. And he worked at a mall. And one night he just snaps. And the evil elves that he was killing the entire time were actually his employees. And the Krampus he was fighting was actually his boss, I think, or one of the workers. And he realizes this, but still, for some reason, continues to kill people as the camera and the timeline switch back and forth to Santa Claus in the shop fighting evil elves to the present-day mall that we're in. And he ends up getting shot by the police, and that's the movie. And that was a total cop-out, and I wish they didn't do that. I wish they just kept it to where all these events were actually happening. Now, one thing I'm actually confused about with this Santa Claus segment is that it doesn't tie in with the rest of the movies. So if you're saying that this Santa Claus was crazy and nothing he did at the North Pole actually happened, does that make the other segments in this movie irrelevant? That's something they don't really explain in the movie. Like the family with the possessed kid in the woods, or the family that confesses their sins before getting killed by Krampus, or the murder house segment where the girl ends up having the Antichrist baby. I guess none of that really happened, it's a plot hole that makes no sense. If you're gonna do a plot hole like that, where Santa Claus turns out to be crazy, you shouldn't have showed the other segments to begin with. Because that one plot twist basically made this movie so confusing. But at the same time, this movie doesn't really take itself seriously, right? Like, you know it's crazy from the get-go. You know it's over-the-top ridiculous from the get-go. As soon as this movie starts, when Santa Claus starts fighting the evil elves and all the other segments. So, I don't know, man. Like, I wanted this movie to be good, and it was getting good. And as I said, I would watch this movie again just to watch the Santa Claus fighting the evil elves segments. Because that was both creepy. Like, that entire segment was creepy. Seeing the elves being that way, that was creepy. Santa Claus being a badass, that was awesome. But it's like, this movie is like two movies in one movie. They wanted to make this an anthology film about different things that happen on Christmas. Yet, it wasn't about that. They wanted to make this movie about Santa Claus fighting the Krampus and the evil elves, but it wasn't about that. It's like they could have taken both of these ideas with William Shatner's anthology thing talking about the different horrible things that happen on Christmas, and they could have taken the concept of Santa Claus fighting these elves, and that could have been two separate movies. And it's two separate movies that are like down the drain that they will never get around to ever make. And like, I hope they do one day. Like, just take these two ideas from this movie and make them two separate movies. Rename them, you know, make them irrelevant to this movie. And trust me, those will be way better movies. Like I said, I really wanted to like this film, and I almost did. But the anthology part at the beginning, with the other stories, and then the plot twist at the very end, it didn't do this movie justice, and it just didn't do it for me. And I have no other reason to watch this movie. This movie was... I wanted this movie to be something that it wasn't. And it almost was. I wanted to be that anthology film, and I wanted to be about bad... So, with these flaws and these irregularities, whatever you want to fucking call it, if I had to give this movie a scale of 1 to 10, I give it a 3. Yeah, I give it a 3. I was about to say 4, but that's being too nice. I give it a 3 because this movie wanted to be something that it wasn't. And this movie took two awesome story ideas for two different movies and put them in one movie. And this movie had these anthology segments that just didn't sell it for me. And this movie had high production value, but it didn't really go anywhere with its production value. Like, you had a good budget to make a decent film, and it just failed. This movie would have been good if it wasn't for the plot twist and if it wasn't for the boring anthology segments. They would have been much more interesting had they just been shorter. And if you just got rid of that plot twist, then, hey, this movie, it would have made it for me. It really would. So, there's that. I give it a 3. And would I say, would you rewatch it? No. This movie has no rewatchable value, so I would never bother rewatching it again. The only reason, like I said so many times, why I would watch it is to simply just see Santa Claus being a badass for at least 20 minutes, and that would have been okay. Guys, this is The Great Geek Detective. Thank you for watching my channel, and thank you for your support, and thank you for the likes and subscribes. If you haven't, please like and subscribe to my channel, because it helps me out a lot. Or leave a comment below if you want to talk about this movie, or whatever you want to do. So, yeah, that's my 2 cents. If you have something to say about this film, let me know, and I'll be happy to reply to you. This is Matthew Scooby, guys. I'm going to go for now. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other videos as I review movies daily, so I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.